Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Microsoft Game Changing Hardware webinar. And now, to introduce one of the first Surface people at Microsoft, Jack Cowart, Senior Director of the Surface Commercial Team based in Seattle, home of the Duwamish people and home of Microsoft headquarters. Over to you, Jack.
Emily, thank you for having me. I feel like that was quite the introduction, and I'm flattered by it. I've had the privilege of working on the Surface business for 12 years. I was the part of the original team that wrote the business case to our CEO at the time to justify the investment to get into first-party hardware. And it's been a privilege for me to help participate in growing this business over the last 12 years. I've had a chance to work in our marketing team. I moved to Singapore and spent a couple of years in Asia getting familiar with the needs and wants of our commercial business customers. And I certainly spent a lot of time with schools just listening to what they needed and wanted out of our hardware. I've been back in Seattle now, I think, for 6 or 7 years, and my focus has really been on taking the voice of our commercial business customers and driving it into our roadmap. And it's a really fun job. It's not very common that you get a chance to stay connected to the product that you're building in a really close and intimate way and to your end customers. And so I feel privileged to have that opportunity. Russell, who's with us today, has been an incredible partner of mine over the years. He has been relentless in pushing for the needs and wants of our education customers. He has helped me think through the difference between the needs and wants of a student, the needs and wants of an educator, and the needs and wants of an IT professional that has to manage and support these devices. And so as we sit down, the team that I'm managing now is really responsible for taking that voice and putting it into our roadmap. And I can see those customer requirements coming to life in the hardware that we're building now and that's on the horizon for the next few years. And I think what is most exciting to me, Emily, is I see all three of those communities, the students that pick up the device, the administrators that are at the front of the room or perhaps untethered from the front of the room for the first time, walking around and engaging with students, and those IT professionals. They're, all the things they've been asking for years are there. I think education has been central to the energy that drove us with Surface. It was about doing something different. It was about doing something better. We always believed in the kind of multimodal interaction paradigm that we were introducing with touch, with pen, with keyboard for students who were at that level where they needed it. So I'm glad to be here, an opportunity to just connect with education customers in Australia. I know that the team's going to have a great session for you today, and hopefully we'll share a lot about what we've done, where we're going. I'm sure they'll stop, they'll listen, they'll take your feedback. Door is open for Sean, for Russell, and for Emily constantly to come to my team. I've got a local engineering resource in Australia named Peter Lewis, incredible guy. His job is to fix problems when you're working with your customer support teams and they get stuck, and then to bring your voice into the roadmap. So it's just a pleasure to be here. I am very proud of the products that we've built with your voice, and I'm really excited about the next couple of years. There's a lot of innovation coming, and so I'm sure all of you are hearing about AI and you're trying to understand what that means in the education space. I would implore you to push the team and ask questions about the difference between AI that's running in the cloud and AI that's running at the edge. Ask about NPUs and VPUs and what does it mean to run some of those workloads. The next few years are going to be incredibly exciting, and our path to success lies with you and listening to you. So thank you for having me. I hope your voice will continue to come through the other Microsoft leaders that are on the phone and through Peter, who's there as a resource for you constantly. So thanks for having me, Emily, Russell, Sean. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Jack. Thanks so much. We're really pleased to have you join us, and even more pleased to have that great connection with your team, that we're able to give feedback that we hear from our schools and our teachers and our students here in Australia, and share that with you so that we can better shape the products that we're developing and the solutions that we create for the classroom. I'm now thrilled to introduce our speaker, Sean Tierney, Director of Global Education and a leader in education digital transformation across our business. Sean Tierney is going to share with us the importance of devices in schools and quite specifically how we see the future of education and where the market's headed. So Sean, I'm going to throw to you.
Thank you, Emily, and thanks, Jack. I really appreciate it. Good afternoon, everybody. I thought I'd start off, and I can't. There we go. I thought I'd start off just addressing the elephant in the room, and I know Jack just touched on this, but we are in a time that is very interesting, and one of the most important things that we get asked about at the moment is this idea of AI, artificial intelligence, particularly now as we're getting through this generative AI conversation. So, I want to set a little bit of context before we start talking about devices. And if you've heard me speak before, this is probably going to sound a bit like a scratched record, because the sort of things I'm saying that are consistent with what I've been saying for decades now around how we think about transformation in education. But the first thing is, when we talk about AI, we're really, I wanted to bring up a couple of things. There's this issue about, will I be replaced by a machine? How am I going to be, looking about careers in the future? Where are young people going to go out for their jobs? Because we're seeing this automation and these sort of things. But actually, it's a really exciting time not to feel threatened by AI, but to feel supported by it. And there's a lot of research that I'm going to sort of flash up, because there's so much that I just want to touch on the key headlines and let you think through the connection between AI and hardware. So this idea of people and soft skills, and the research that's coming out saying how important it is to employers to start thinking about, I don't call them new skills, I don't like to call them 21st century skills, but I like to always hark back to this point, this quote here, which is our goal should be to help children to do things they couldn't do before at levels of complexity that was previously inaccessible. That's why we should be doing all of this right now, with AI as the frame, moving to a bigger focus on what we would call soft skills or 21st century skills, which I hate that term, but skills for tomorrow's workforce, whatever it is, okay, is really important. And there's a lot of benefit to AI that we're going to see in terms of how we save teachers time, we make curriculum more meaningful, we can serve things up that is content that's more suitable and relevant to a student where they are. We can automate processes and save teachers time by removing redundant processes or barriers to productivity that have been there in the past. And without going into this slide, because I know there's a lot of stuff in there, it's really important that we think through what is this going to mean to young people as they're learning, and how we're going to make sure that AI is something that sits with us, works with us, empowers young people and prepares them for a meaningful future, helps teachers to be more productive and effective, is totally secure and safe, and helps young people feel more connected and contributing in a meaningful way to society. Now, while all of that's been happening, we've also obviously had this pandemic where we've seen globally, and this is one of the projects I've been working on, is watching what's happening around the world and trying to learn from what are governments, ministries, school systems, jurisdictions doing. And we've seen the biggest procurement of just devices. And most of the time it was just, let's just get devices in the hands with no real core metrics and how we're going to do that. People going out, just rushing out to buy as many devices as they could. And, the success was, how many did we get? Did we get enough in the hands of kids? What's the ratio look like? And, that was the end of it. Now, but for nearly 2 decades, I've been saying, please don't make ratio a goal. Please don't make just access a goal. But that has been what's happened. And then, interestingly enough, the vision, the reason for why we're doing this has just been, we've got to find a way to connect with students. We've got to find something that allows us to talk to them, or to push content to them, or to do something that helps them to be connected. While that was happening, the RFP process, where people have gone out and bought devices, with all these dynamics and all these changes going on in this really quite different and complex world, the focus has been on how many megabytes, how much RAM, what's the data, what's the spec look like, really traditional, typical RFP. And I think it's comparing apples with oranges when you say, what do we actually want with what are we actually asking for? We're asking for machines. We're not asking for the thing that really empowers students to do more. And the data that we're seeing coming out of the last couple of years, particularly, Bruce Dixon, a friend of mine, used to call this the research of the bleeding obvious, robo. But effectively what it is we've learned, and I'll put my record in there, that, and this is a great report from McKinsey, just giving technology out doesn't work. In fact, quite often it will undermine learning, right? So that if we give it out, we just do it without all the necessary infrastructure, the preparation, connectivity, teacher professional learning, that's the broken record I'm talking about. The data is showing that it's not having any kind of impact. It's not working the way we want it to work, and that we are really letting students down and wasting a lot of money. Right now, at the same time, it's critical that we empower teachers. Again, I'm talking like a broken record, and this is stuff you all know, but the data is so strong saying if we don't prepare teachers, we should be giving them devices before kids in Australia. I know that we've already passed that milestone, but in a lot of the parts of the world, students are getting devices before teachers. It's just breaking down, right? So while we have to do all the platform and groundwork, is still really critical that we put teachers in a position where everything they do is at the service of improving learning outcomes for students, being more efficient and more effective in their own way of working so that they can empower students with the better learning opportunities, more inclusive, etc. We've been working on a paper called What Really Matters and What's Worth Doing, but really as we think through devices and we move from the conversation of AI being setting up a new world through a pandemic where we've had just a dump of devices and we've learned a lot, to the point of what really matters and what's worth doing, we know that just giving a student with keyboard or a really simple underpowered device restricts the teacher's capability to do pedagogically creative things. It tries to take the way that we live and fit it into a box that just doesn't work, right? We know that if we give students, screens where they're supposed to read, but it's all hyperlinked, that it fractures attention, it causes distraction, that it creates a whole lot of other complexity that doesn't have, students loving reading and wanting to read for pleasure and for leisure and absorbing less information over time and focusing less. We know that it's critical that teachers get devices first, that they're empowered. And we know that we have to have a model where we think about the return on investment being far more than ratio, far more than just buying devices. And so if we go back to that apples and oranges metaphor, what was important before, which I still think is choosing a device that is the most powerful for learning, that allows teachers to do things, to help the students do things that they couldn't do before, is more important than ever. It's now non-negotiable. So where we look at the typical RFP being bits and bytes and bobs, I'm really looking for people who are saying, you know what, an RFP should be, instead of taking the language of the device providers and trying to fit that into our model, we should be taking the model of learning and fitting that into the model of a device manufacturer. So what matters in learning? What really matters and what's worth doing? Not restricting students to trying to work through an interface that's not relevant or that restricts the way they can think, learn, create, express themselves, etc. So those multimodal inputs, the mountain of research that we've got now to show how important this is overwhelming. We need things that now in a mode of AI, in an age of AI, that allow the device to actually support the AI at the edge, as Jack mentioned before. It cannot just be in a browser where the cloud's doing all the work. You're missing out on too much opportunity for kids. And at the speed of change and at always accelerating speed of change, that's becoming more and more important every day. We need to help teachers to have access to technology that doesn't restrict how they design learning. They need to be able to express, they need to be able to create learning that opens up their imagination. We often say that teachers should be considered like artists, Right? Teaching is an art form, and we often forget that we should be empowering teachers to be creative. It's one of the most creative professions on the planet. But if we say to them, I want you to be creative, but you have to be creative within the box of just a keyboard or just some basic apps, you're giving them a pencil instead of a suite of brushes and all sorts of other ways of performing their art, right? So with that in context and that in mind, I'm going to hand it over to Russell. And hopefully that setup made some sense there, Russ. But if you could just take over now and help us understand the connection between devices, AI, the frame that we've just set up there, I'll pass it over to you.
No worries. Thank you, Sean. And I think one of the things you said was really resonating in my head as you said it, and that is that the education industry has kind of been forced to adopt the language of the technology industry. And when you look at the McKinsey report, the only way they separated the type of device that was delivered to students when they put them in the hands of students was whether or not it was a laptop or a tablet. And for most people, that means that it's a like an electronic typewriter kind of thing, so that you're capturing information just by typing, or it's a tablet and it has kind of those tablet connotations, so that it's a low-powered device. You can use it walking around, but it is a compromise because you can't type on the screen. So we believe that as Jack said, from the very outset, when we designed Surface, we designed it to accommodate the person. First things first is Jack also mentioned AI. Sean also mentioned AI. AI is not new. It's been around since the 1950s. But there is a distinction between AI at the edge, which is predominantly what's in Surface at the moment, and AI in the cloud, which is the generative AI things that we've been talking about in the media for the last 4 months since ChatGPT exploded in popularity. Now, AI at the edge, what it really does is it helps us with the experience on the device, things like anomaly detection, computer vision, and that means that the device can do things better than it used to be able to do, and you don't need to concern yourself over whether or not it's capable of doing things. The reason that Surface is so successful is because in my 20 years in the hardware business, I've never seen a company go about it in this way, and that is that we really create devices around the people, and it's not just words. When you go to the Surface Design Labs in Seattle, you'll see that we have a human factors lab, and we have people in there that are published experts in their area of biomechanics and psychoacoustical people. So like people that are crazy smart in terms of how does a human being work and what does the device provide as an interface between the person, the idea, the thought, and the concept that they're trying to convey. The anechoic chamber is one of the most amazing things you'll ever see. It's certified by the Guinness Book of World Records as the quietest place on Earth. That's where all the Surface audio is designed. So microphones and speakers are designed in there. And if you're like me, if you like to geek out on things, it is right on the very, very edge of physics, right to the point where you can basically hear the sound of air particles hitting each other. It is an incredible investment that Microsoft has made just to improve audio hardware so that the audio, the psychoacoustical equipment can help people think with those sounds. Then we have the Applied Sciences Lab where we really talk about the futures of technology. So things like virtual teleportation and kind of these really out there concepts so that people know, people design things that are going to come in next generations of devices to help people. And the Advanced Prototyping Center really helps us to be able to come up with those concepts, prototype those products, and then put them into production very quickly so they can be tested and validated. So all of that technology and all of that investment has meant that Surface really has led the industry forward in a number of ways. And there's a lot of things on this slide. I'm not going to talk to them, but the one thing I will touch on is the very top one at about 11 o'clock or thereabouts is the full-featured, full-powered 2-in-1. As we mentioned in the McKinsey report, this is not a tablet. It is not a laptop. It is a 2-in-1. It is a full-featured, full-powered device that you can dock and you can carry it around. You can do every single thing that you can do on a full-featured notebook, but you can also use the modalities of inking and touch to be able to achieve more. And then there's a whole bunch of other things around this screen which you can look at your leisure. But from an IT perspective, whether it's securing the device, deploying the device, managing, controlling the device, or from a usability perspective, there are a lot of advancements that Surface has brought to the hardware industry. And these are the ones that are valued by education. And what we're going to do today is, because we don't have all day to talk about it, we're going to really focus on just 3 of those. So the ability to ink and form factor, as Jack said, this is something that Surface has believed in from the very beginning. Multimodality is super important, and it's probably most important in the area of education. Artificial intelligence at the edge and how that enhances your experience, and Surface audio and cameras. So that's what we're going to touch on today, just briefly. First and foremost, inking and form factor. What we're going to see here is my daughter is in year 11, and unlike most of us who are on the call, probably most of us are information workers. We'll go to the office, we'll plug into a monitor, and we'll do primarily the same thing day in, day out, using the same types of information, the same types of modality. My daughter, on the other hand, when she goes to school, she has to be prepared to take her notes in maths, and that is a symbol-based learning subject. Or then she'll move to English, and then she'll go to languages or natural sciences. And if she's asked to write down a complex mathematical formula, I want her to be able to just capture that formula, not have to think about how do I use one of those funky maths keyboard software packages to represent the question. Because Sean mentioned about being in the flow and breaking that flow of concentration. The idea of multimodality is really to make sure that students can transition from symbol-based learning to text-based learning as seamlessly as possible without having to rethink how they're going to interact with their device. The device should just be a conduit, and that conduit should be as wide and as open as possible for people to capture their content. And as you can see down the bottom, we have a real diversity of information types. We've got audio and multimedia, touch and pen and keyboard. No one of these input methodologies is the best for everything. So what you do need is you need to have a device, as I said before, a 2-in-1 device that can switch between all of them seamlessly. Now, in order to illustrate the importance of inking in learning, first and foremost is the first one to touch on is this one. A study by Van der Meer and Van der Wiel, and what they found is when they studied the electrophysiological information when someone was using a pen, they found that using a pen really did activate more regions of the brain, which meant that their recommendation was traditional handwritten notes with visualizations help to facilitate and optimize learning. So that just tells you that physically and physiologically, you're more engaged when you're using a pen. There are more studies that go even further, and the first one is this one, Mueller and Oppenheimer. Now, this one's interesting because what they did is they had 2 groups of people. They had a group of people that had a pen-based device, and they had a people who had a keyboard-based device. They presented information to all of them and then asked them to come back in a week and said, we're going to test you on your recall of this information. And then they allowed each of those groups, half of them, so half of the keyboard groups could study their notes and half of the pen groups could study their notes. Now, what they found was obviously the best performing group was the group of people who were able to use inking and were permitted to study their notes. And that was a significant performance improvement over the laptop group. So it was 39% better than those who had a laptop and could study their notes, and 24% better than a laptop and were not permitted to study their notes. And if you're kind of paying attention there, you would have been like me and you would have thought, well, hang on a second, the people who were permitted to study their notes performed worse? And the answer to that is yes, because if you have a look at the types of information that was delivered, it's conceptual information. So when you're trying to understand concepts, using an interface that is restrictive and doesn't permit you to capture the information in its most natural form means that you're less likely to understand that content. And now in the world of AI, because we now have access to all the information that we could ever possibly want at our fingertips, it's understanding the concepts that becomes even more critical for learners. The quote here, I think, is pretty important. So when we use a laptop, it can negatively affect our performance, our academic performance, if we're not using the right modality at the time. The next study is this one, which is a brand new one. This book was released only 2 months ago by a researcher by the name of Daniel Willingham. He is a 20-year veteran studying how human beings learn. He's a PhD. And what he found is that there are a bunch of activities that you've got to do when you go into a lecture. that ranged from listening, evaluating content, deciding how to paraphrase, understanding and physically capturing your notes, and so on, as you can see. When you write longhand, most people, when they write longhand, they can write 20 to 40 words per minute. And what they found was that they weren't able to write fast enough. So they thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start typing my notes, because I can type my notes basically verbatim at 120 words per minute. But what this researcher found was that in the process of doing that, you actually robbed yourself of the ability to paraphrase and understand the content as you were capturing it. So those people who typed their notes, who had more voluminous notes, actually had worse recall of the content. So if you are going to take notes, his suggestion was you should use a pen, use informal notation, use non-linguistic notation, and use shorthand, because you're most likely to reprocess that information and understand it. Now, as I said before, understanding the content or the concept is more important these days than remembering facts. And what this scenario leads to when you type your notes is you might remember more facts, but you might not be able to link the facts together, and therefore you may not understand the concepts as well as if you had written your handwritten notes. And the final study that I'll talk to is one that we've had for a little while now, but this is from Sharon Oviatt. And I'm going to start with, firstly, this paper is entitled The Impact of Interface Affordances on Human Ideation, Problem Solving and Inferential Reasoning. And her quote is very clear. It says, the evidence is clear. The type of interfaces makes a bigger difference than we ever thought. Computers can either enhance a student's ability to think, communicate and learn, or seriously undermine it, which supports the outcomes of the McKinsey report that Sean mentioned earlier. If you just give someone a device and expect that they're going to know how to use it, or they misuse that interface, then they're probably going to harm their ability to understand the content. And on the right-hand side, you can see that her research suggested that when you give someone a pen, they create 56% more non-linguistic representations compared to those who only had access to a keyboard. They increased the student's ability to express ideas by 38.5% and generated 10% more correct ideas than those who did not have access to a pen. So there's a significant impact on people's ability to understand concepts when they're studying, recall those concepts the first time around if they're forced to use a device that just has a keyboard. And to prove a point, like I said before, if you were to write down a complex chemistry formula or mathematical formula and try and capture it with a keyboard, you'll know that you're taking yourself out of that flow of learning and you're not understanding the content as well as you could have been. So that's the first section on inking and pens. Second section we're going to talk about really quickly is audio and cameras. And this is where that anechoic chamber and the investment in artificial intelligence and AI at the edge really does come to the fore. What you'll see here is that there's a whole study on intelligibility when it comes to audio. Now, a lot of people are probably sitting there thinking, we don't teach remotely anymore. That may or may not be the case. So that's why down the bottom here for each of these different scenarios, I've suggested where the audio hardware has an impact not only in remote learning, but in your utility and usage of some of those really intelligent artificial intelligence learning tools that we've built into our M365 platform and accessibility tools. So if you're unfamiliar with what they are, things like Presenter Coach, Translate, Dictate, and a whole bunch of other things, really intelligent tools. If they don't hear you properly, then the effectiveness of those tools is diminished. Reading progress is a super important example. So if a student is reading a passage and the computer is evaluating their understanding or their ability to quote that passage, and the hardware is not up to the task, then they're not going to get the benefit out of those learning tools. So in each of these three different areas, we have a solution that has been built specifically into Surface. So for instance, we tune all of our audio in the anechoic chambers, as I said before, when we have things like high fidelity mode in Teams. With regard to background noise, we have beam-forming dual array microphones. Now, what the artificial intelligence in there takes multiple microphones and is able to deduce what is background noise, what is unwanted noise, what is something that can be removed. And before the software even gets a chance to process that audio information, it's cleaned up and it makes sure that the software is able to kind of make best use of what it can hear. NPU powered noise cancellation. Sure, we have noise cancellation built into Teams, but there is an impact on your CPU. If your CPU is doing all the work, which we'll talk about in a second, it means that it's not going to perform as well, and it's going to have other unintended consequences. And voice clarity, you'll see in a second. So we're going to talk about each one of these really quickly. The first one is frequency response. Now, the reason I've included this here is because if you do get a chance ever to do the tour of the Microsoft anechoic chamber, there's one of the auditory psychologists in there talks about languages and different sounds that people have in their languages and how important that is. And it's quite a compelling conversation. So I've tried to capture that here. And what you can see here is that we have on the right-hand side, you've got the ISO, the Industry Standards Organization standard for remote interpretation of speech. So that means that if you're going to have full comprehension of what's being said, then you should have an accurate representation of audio between 125 hertz and 12,500 hertz. And you'll see in those other colored boxes down below, you've got the typical telephone audio frequencies from 300 to 3,400. So you can see there's a whole lot of frequencies there that are not covered. Then you'll have different types of languages, retroflexion languages, palatized languages. But the important difference here is between the voiced consonants and the unvoiced consonants. They make a huge difference to intelligibility. And you can see that the unvoiced consonants go all the way out to 8,000 hertz. Now, unvoiced consonants, if you're curious, are sounds that you make when you're not engaging your voice box. So things like a T or an S or an F. And I'm going to show you a video from an external source, which is from a website, from a YouTube site called Microphone University. And this guy is explaining how these frequencies impact on your ability to understand content.
Consonants are predominantly found in the frequency range above 500 Hz, but most of them are in the area between 2 to 4 kHz. Reflections, background noise, or music can easily mask or bury the consonants. Listen to this word. You can't really tell what is being said, but if I remove the reverb so you can hear it without the reflections, you will understand it. Missed. The consonants are extremely important for the speech intelligibility, so the mismatch between the loud vowels and the fine details in the consonants is a huge problem. So, if your microphone doesn't capture all frequencies or doesn't reproduce them equally, the natural sound of the voice is jeopardized. I will give you an example. Here I have removed the 2 kHz area with an EQ. And in this example, the EQ is now back to flat and the speech should sound normal again. The reason for this is that this 2 to 4 kHz area is where the consonants in non-tonal language are predominant. And without these consonants, the intelligibility is reduced. So the conclusion is, to secure full speech intelligibility, you have to make sure you don't let the energy of the vowels mask, cover, or drown the fine details of the consonants. Preserve all frequencies, lows, mids, and highs.
So you can see how important it is that people like Microsoft invest in the ability to create this artificial intelligence in the audio hardware to make sure that the software and the hardware can hear properly. What Sean was touching on before is when you look at an RFP, there's often very little attention given to some of the technology that drives an experience. There's a lot of attention on making sure we have the latest CPU, but none on the stuff that drives the experience and the intelligibility. So we're going on to the next, to another audio factor that affects intelligibility. This time it's background noise. It's similar to the last conversation that you just saw on the video. And again, this is useful in multiple scenarios, not just for remote learning. And you might think that, well, we've got devices that have microphones. what I wanted to do here is try and illustrate that there is a significant difference when you're using different devices in the intelligibility of using those devices. Okay, so we're going to do a quick test of audio and video performance in a classroom setting. In front of me here, I have a Surface Pro 9 with the Surface Dual Array beamforming microphone. Over here, I have a standard device, and over here, I have a standard device. You'll notice is that the frequency response ranges from the Surface is really good because you get really good top-end sounds and low-end sounds. That helps with intelligibility. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch over to one of the different devices, and you'll see a significant difference in the quality of the audio. So now I'm talking to this device over here, and you'll notice that the sound quality is not quite as good. It's a little bit more quiet, and it's a little bit harder to hear what I'm saying. I'm going to switch over to the third device. Now this device has a microphone that picks up a lot more ambient noise. So you'll see that there's a lot of noise coming from echo and reverberation, which makes it a little bit more difficult to hear. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch on some classroom noises to simulate a standard classroom environment. And then I'm going to turn to the blackboard or the whiteboard, and I'm going to give you some letters and see if you can pick up the letters and illustrate how the intelligibility works when you can't hear that well. So this is a standard classroom noise. It's playing in the background. You may already be able to hear it very well. If I turn over here and I talk to the whiteboard and I say the letters B, O, I, N, and T. So I've given you 5 letters there, and hopefully you're able to pick them up. But maybe with the ambient noise and the way the microphone works, it might have been a little bit more difficult. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch back over to the Surface device. So the Surface device is now running. It has the same audio running in the background. The microphone is right next to the speaker as it was with the other device. And if I turn over to the whiteboard again and I say the 5 letters E, O, I, N, and T, and I turn back to you, hopefully you will have understood the whole point of the lesson. So firstly, I think the demonstrator was very professional, very competent, very handsome. But I think that the important thing to note here is that noise cancellation was on for all devices within Teams, within the software. What you're hearing in the difference here is the artificial intelligence is built into the hardware of Surface versus a traditional device. Now, it's not just about can I hear well or can I not hear well? It's about am I capturing the content or not? What is the cost of us not hearing the content when a teacher is trying to convey a message? A lot of students are reluctant to put their hand up and say, excuse me, I didn't hear that or I didn't understand that. And this helps them understand it the first time. Now, the next demonstration is actually about exactly what I just described. What happens when a student does want to put their hand up and interrupt and ask a question? Well, again, this is some more artificial intelligence built into the audio hardware that permits a student to do just that.
We want to promote sustainable development and low carbon business practices.
Jude, could I ask a quick question, please?
And cloud-enabled technologies. We continuously strive to promote sustainability in our operations, products, policies, business practices, and cloud-enabled technologies. We continuously.
Hi Jude, I've got a quick question.
Yes, John?
So what about products and services, not just business practices?
Excellent question. Actually, the investments we make in sustainability carry through to our
So that's an example of why Microsoft spends so much money to put a facility such as the anechoic chamber and all of these human factors experts in the labs in Seattle to design these things that enhance your experience as a learner. A couple of further examples are things like the camera. Again, an RFP might just say, hey, we need you to have a 1080p camera. This is an example that a colleague of mine sent to me, which compares a high-end OEM device with a Surface device. And you can see that it's chalk and cheese. I mean, on paper, they might look the same, but in practice, they're very, very different. And beyond just having a good quality piece of hardware, there is software in there that does some enhancement and some optimization for different levels of light. And you'll see here in particular where the device is having to try and accurately represent multiple skin tones. We're making sure that we actually tune things for multiple skin tones, but also for light that's coming in the background versus the foreground. And you can see the surface width optimization on the left is dealing much better with the environment that this person is trying to use to present in. So that's audio and cameras. The AI experience, we're going to touch on this one just super quickly because this is a really big conversation. And this is how we've typically done things in the past. So on the left-hand side, you can see the before the NPU. So when you have a device with, as your RFP said, it's got the latest Core i7 silicon. That silicon had to do everything. So it had to run PowerPoints, emails, Edge, and Teams. And if you're running background blur on Teams and you're running noise cancellation on Teams, then your CPU is spinning up a lot of cycles in order to cater for those enhancements. Now, what's the impact of that? Well, the impact of that is that the device can run hotter, it's going to use a lot more energy, and it's probably going to significantly impact the potential battery life that you get out of that device. What you will see, what you saw on the right-hand side is that the guy who was doing the demo walking on the wall, and you'll see it again in a second, a lot of those functions can be offloaded to this new piece of silicon called an NPU. Now that NPU runs and does enormous amounts of calculations, but it uses 15 times less energy. So even though the core CPU on the device on the right-hand side might bench test slower than the one on the left-hand side, what you will find is that as a user, your experience will be better because the NPU is doing more of the work. Now, to illustrate how some of these features use the NPU, we're going to see 3 very quick videos.
The camera will track me no matter where I am in the room, whether I'm sitting at my desk or standing up and walking around. This is great for people who think on their feet and like to walk around or talk with their hands while they're brainstorming or in a meeting. I love it because even when I'm farther away from the camera, it still keeps me crystal clear with super resolution.
So that's a great demo because what you can see is that it's kind of like having a cameraman. And if you were doing a lesson standing in front of the classroom, you could move around and the device, the NPU, will actually follow you. And because the hardware has such high resolution in the camera, it looks like it's zooming in with a physical zoom lens, but it's not. It's just doing artificial intelligence. The next demo is one that we've had in Surface devices for a number of years now, and it's quite impressive.
It can feel unnatural when you're on a Teams call to be looking directly into the camera, and what you want to do is look at the video feed like I am now and see where the other people are talking. With eye gaze correction, I can be looking at the video feed, and it looks like I'm looking directly at you.
So you can imagine as a teacher that gives you greater connection with your students, particularly if they're remote, or if you're recording some content for them to play back. Also, it helps them stay engaged with the teacher. And the final one.
Watch as I turn on bokeh and my background softly fades, hiding the mess of toys behind me and making it so that I, as the speaker, am highlighted in crystal clear high definition. It's like having a DSLR camera inside your device.
Yeah, and as I said before, you can do a background blur on devices without an NPU, but again, you're using a CPU which is going to consume 15 times more power. It's going to not be as effective, and it's going to ensure that your battery life is less than if you were using a device with an NPU. Now, again, just to re-emphasize, a lot of the time, people when they go out to an RFP, they say, I must have the latest Intel CPU because they want to future-proof their investment. What this does is it gives you the ability to have future-proofed experiences without having to necessarily go for the latest and greatest CPU because you're doing things differently. The whole point of Surface is to do things differently and bring new experiences to the table. Now, Surface's AI on the client really does revolutionize education because all of the, as I said before, all of the artificial intelligence learning tools that we have, and a lot of the other experiences that you're going to have using things like Teams or Microsoft 365 or inking or whatever, they're going to be enhanced by AI on the client. AI on the client means that it's going to be super responsive, it's going to be super efficient, and you're going to get a far better experience when you're using AI infused hardware in conjunction with the software that was designed to take advantage of it. So we're kind of reaching the end of the conversation. what we wanted to do here is really to point out that devices, a lot of the time people see devices as the commodity that they buy after they've made all their decisions on things like security and deployment and productivity and learning impact. But really devices have a significant impact on the advantage that you get throughout the entire organization. So you can see all of these elements along here. So if you're looking to have a successful identity management scenario where the device can actually have an impact on that by using things like Windows Hello and TPM. It can really help ensure that you've got a really secure environment. Things like endpoint protection, the ability to control the firmware and control the device in terms of from a central console and look at compliance to your security policies. If the device is integrated with your security and software tools, then you're going to get far greater utility out of those devices. On the flip side, and we've seen some of these things now in this conversation, if you're in teaching and leadership, you can see that some of these enhancements really do give you the ability to not just have a compromised tablet experience where you have to type on a screen, but you get the benefit of mobility. With something like a Surface, you have that mobility. You also have the keyboard. You have a full-powered device that you can dock in, like I'm doing right now. I'm running off multiple monitors just on a Surface, using just the Surface audio, and it's super high quality. And all of these elements in the school can be impacted by the choice of device. And the reason that that's the case is because all of our software and hardware tools and security tools and management tools have been designed to work together. You've probably heard separate conversations about the Microsoft Surface Silicon to Cloud security story. That is a super compelling story. If you're using a Surface device and you have the ability to update and control the firmware from your console, you've got the Surface Management Portal, and it all plugs into the Intune management system and M365. It is a really compelling, cost-effective, very great, very good TCO, total economic impact solution for schools. We also have the best of the breed when it comes to sustainability and accessibility, and there are separate documents and separate conversations that we can have about both of those elements. So, if you're unfamiliar with our range of devices, you'll know that I haven't been here telling you about all the different devices, but we do have a big range of devices now. We started out with a couple when Jack started in the company. We've now got 2-in-1 devices in the Go and the Pro products, which are 2-in-1 detachable devices. And then we have all the way up to the Laptop Go, Laptop and Laptop Studio, which are really high horsepower, more traditional style devices, but they still come with all of the AI, all the management and all the security that you would expect from a Surface device. We then have the Studio for those who need to be creative on a desktop, and that device again, it seeks to enable multimodality because you can lay the device down and you can use digital ink on that device and create content as you would in a professional design studio. And the hub is really about shared spaces and enabling campuses to have collaborative zones and really have a fantastic experience collaborating with people in and outside of the campus. So back to the analogy that Sean brought up, which is our typical RFP. What we'd like to see have happen is for people to really change the game themselves by considering, what are we asking the industry for? Do we really need to just say we want a notebook computer, or do we want that multimodality? Do we want to take advantage of the inking? Is it that important to say we need the 13th generation or higher Intel Core i7? Because what happens if you're using an ARM-based processor with an NPU? What does that do for your user experience? If you're on the technical side of the school, modern deployment, people still ask for imaging. It astounds me that people still ask for imaging, but modern deployment can decrease your time to deploy by 62%. Have 15% less performance-related issues and far fewer security incidents. And your return to service when using modern deployment is much quicker. Things like screens, our aspect ratios are unique compared to most people in the industry because they're designed to provide an experience. They're designed to work like a piece of paper. When you turn it on the side, It replicates the shape of a piece of paper, not a long, skinny screen that's optimized for watching movies, for instance. We also need to ensure that people consider things like all the audio and video things that I mentioned just before. So asking for making sure that a device has stereo speakers and audio and input and output, is that enough? Does that help or hinder people's ability to learn in a learning environment? And then battery life is kind of arbitrary in a lot of cases, because again, you might bench test the device and you might be happy with the bench test results, but if it's used as it's intended to be used, it might not deliver anywhere near what you expect it to deliver. So what we're asking for is for people to consider requesting of the industry what you need as an experience, rather than prescribing the type of device that gets delivered, because that will make sure that everybody, not just Surface, but everybody can respond to the demands of learners and educators across the globe. And that's it for me. So with that, I'll open back up to Emily.
Thanks so much, Russell and Sean, and thank you everybody for staying with us on this journey. I'm hoping you've got some questions that you're happy to pop in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. Really want to think about all the areas in which Surface and Microsoft in Education have grown. It's from the feedback that we get from customers. So I'd love to hear from you. And Russell, there actually is already a question in the chat awaiting us to be answered, I believe. Will the new Surface have more GPU? Oh, where did it go? Will this new Surface have more GPU than the Surface 3 for TensorFlow/Keras classification?
That sounds like a future roadmap conversation. So I don't know if you've had the ability to have a chat with one of our specialists, but we don't comment on future roadmap on this call.
Fantastic. So please reach out to Belinda Rostevsky or Chris Turner, who hopefully you are connected with. And if you're not, just drop your drop a request in the chat and we'll provide their details for you.
So other questions. Our teachers and students love their iPads. How do I change the way they think about what they need for learning versus for lifestyle? That's a super good question. So a lot of people really love using their iPad because they're familiar with it. What we find though is that, again, the benefit that something like Surface brings is it is really a device that's targeted at the future skills that people are going to need when they move into employment. An iPad does not deliver that. With a Surface device, you can run industry-grade software, not just apps. You have a proper keyboard experience. You have the integration of inking and all of the other experiential stuff that I spoke about in terms of audio is really significant across the whole software ecosystem, plus the fact that it's manageable and secure and focused on the task of learning. So there are a number of responses to that one. Sean, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I think just to add to what you said there, Russell, there have been a number of studies done to look at which devices are the best for learning, and then to invite students to choose a device that they most want to use. Most students chose the device that was that on average led them to 1 grade point average less, if you know what I mean. So actually what they chose were the devices that had been demonstrated over and over again to reduce the way that they learn, or to diminish the way they learn, or to interfere with it. So I think part of that answer to that question is to have the evidence at hand. We wrote an entire book on this called Transforming Education, where we put an entire chapter on the data of this, but there is a lot of evidence to support the fact that a fully functional device with the full modalities of input make a huge and significant measurable material difference to learning outcomes. Parents should know about that, but they just don't.
Yeah, good question. Good comment, sorry. So one other question popped up is, how do we change the thinking of parents and leadership to help us get more investment in the technology we give to teachers and students? I think the combination of everything that we spoke about on this call should kind of help with that, I think, and that is that the kind of tried and trusted process that a lot of people go through is we need to get devices in the hands of kids, and we need to do that via an RFP that asks for spec. I think we've kind of addressed both of those, but
I would add, Russell, the other thing, the best way to get parents on board is to be doing meaningful things with kids in the classroom that they couldn't do without technology. And I don't mean colouring in a mermaid with your finger. I mean actually doing things that now enable an increased cognitive load, a discretionary cognitive load, where you can see, that's a concept I never grasped as a learner when I was young. My kids picked that up really quickly because they were doing things that technology allowed them to do I just could not have done before. As parents see that, as we push the bar on setting high expectations on what technology should deliver for the learning, parents come on board.
Yeah, and I'll tell an anecdote, which is very personal to me. My daughter was leaving her primary school and moving to high school where they had a BYOD policy. And a lot of parents, as we were literally walking out the gate for the last time of her primary school, because they knew I worked for Microsoft, they were coming up to me saying, we don't know what to buy. Just tell us what to buy. And for me, the light bulb went on, and that was the realization was that parents, in the absence of a reason to believe that something's better for their children, they will default to price, or they'll go to a retail store and get guided on whatever's trendy at the time, or they'll listen to the student. And as Sean said, they'll pick a device that's probably not the best task for the job. I think the evidence that we've provided in a lot of the content earlier in this call is that with the right device that has the right modality, that has the ability to transition from maths to sciences to English to history to natural sciences to human sciences, there is overwhelming research that suggests that ability to transition is super important. And people, I think, will buy into that once they understand that is what's required.
I'm just going to add, we've got to anchor them back in the fact that distraction it can look like engagement. Okay, so you can have kids that really want to be distracted and running away doing something on there where the brain is almost switched off. It looks the same as learning and engagement if you're just watching it from the surface. Wow, look, they're wrapped up in that device. Okay, we're talking about learning where you're able to express your thoughts in a way that is natural with a pen and touch in a digital format that is better than on paper. It's better on paper because you can collaborate on it remotely. You can manipulate it once you've written it. You can convert it to text for other purposes. But having that full, no compromise experience on a device that's really leveraging the latest and greatest from AI will enable the kids to think. If you could put a meter on their head to see how much thinking is actually occurring, and we're talking about thinking, and that includes all the high order, lower order, memory, but cognitive load. That's what we need to start helping the parents to understand. It looks the same as distraction. Engagement and distraction look so similar, but they're so different.
At one point, I've got one more question I want to answer, but one point that I'll add to that is that there's another school that we speak to who had a problem with the BYOD policy because the kids were distracted. The devices were not focused on the task of learning. And this is a device that is integratable into an ecosystem that provides the learning institution the control, but the student the freedom to learn in multiple ways. And the question that I have that I have to answer here is why is Surface different compared to any other Windows device? My honest and very short answer, but I'm happy to talk about it at length, is that I've been 25 years in this business and I've never been more blown away than when I went to that human factors lab and I saw that we had human beings focused on human beings and the device just being the right interface, the right choice for the job. OEMs, other device manufacturers, they'll build great devices, but they'll buy commodities off the shelf based on what has the best value at that point in time for economies of scale. But that means you're buying a compromise potentially. So a 16:9 screen, great for watching movies, not so great for productivity, for example. Sticking a microphone in there just to tick a box because they don't really use it that much versus the demonstration you saw where you could hear the 5 letters that I was giving versus the device that didn't allow you to hear those 5 letters. All of that comes from the human-centered design. How do we help teachers move up the SAMR model using Surface? That's really easy. So a lot of teachers use devices as substitutes. Just read off this screen or type your notes on this device.
I'll just add the fastest way to get to a substitution model and stay there is to do BYOD, where some kids have got a really good device and some kids have the most underpowered browser only or, you know, apps only thing.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, totally agree. So when people have the right change management and adoption given to them when they're using things like Surface and M365 together, then you can really augment learning and you can do things that were otherwise not possible, as Sean said just earlier in the Q&A.
Russell, we've got to close. I would just say on that one, it's the vision for learning. It's understanding this, that what we talked about today is a small piece of a very large puzzle, that, you know, you really have to have that vision, the teacher professional change. It doesn't happen with one part of this. You know, we used to talk about the 21 steps where step 19 was giving the devices out. But, you know, moving through substitution all the way up to redefinition and keeping all of them at the same time, because there's value in all, is important, but it's a very big project, and it's a great question. Emily.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, everybody, for staying with us. We've so loved talking to you. We'll be coming to your inbox with some follow-up from today's session. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.